Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and many of you have been messaging me recently asking about a potential issue with your iPhone 12 series phone where there might be a gap that's too large between the outside edge of the phone and the display itself or the display glass. And so I wanted to help address this. I wanted to look into it myself to see if I thought it was really an issue or not, and to compare it to some older phones as well that were built similarly. So I have the iPhone SE here, for example, and my iPad Pro. So we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. And so I have all of the iPhone 12 series phones this year with the iPhone 12 mini, the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro. And then also, this is my normal daily phone, is my iPhone 12 Pro Max. And so I wanted to take a look at the outside edge of the phones and see if there's actually an issue, because the issue is people are saying the gap between the outside metal edge, in this case stainless steel, and glass is large enough that you could fit a sheet of paper in there, and this could be a problem, or they were wondering if it could be a problem. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this, help address this issue, and let you know what you should do, if anything, if you have this issue. Now, the first thing is, obviously, when you have two materials bumping up next to each other, there's going to be a gap of some sort. That's the tolerance that Apple determines when they set it for manufacturing. If it's within a certain tolerance, it should be acceptable and then shipped out to the customer after quality control. And so you can see around the outside edge, let me get up nice and close, you'll see that there's a little bit of lint or dust in this outside edge. As I go around it, this is the gap that people are concerned about. And so as I go down the side here, you can see that there is a little bit of a gap, and it may vary slightly based on overall tolerances set by Apple. Now, some people are saying this is a huge deal because you can put a piece of paper in there, for example, or because dust is gathering. So I have a piece of paper. I've just broken off or ripped off a piece of paper. And if I work at it real hard here on the corner, you have to be really careful. You can put a sheet of paper in here. So you can see I have a sheet of paper inside here. I can fold it over and it's pushed in between the glass and the frame. And a lot of people are sort of concerned about this, whether or not this should be considered a big issue or not. And so first, let me address the size of this sheet of paper. So this is a micrometer here. I've got it, well, let me zero it out, make sure it's zeroed out. I've got it set to millimeters. And if we measure the thickness of this sheet of paper, bring it down here, and you'll see we're getting about 1/10 of a millimeter, or 0.10 millimeter. And so if I slide this piece of paper out here ever so careful, you'll see that's the gap we're dealing with here. And so that's a super thin gap, and that's the size of the sheet of paper. Now, the question is whether or not you should be concerned about this. And so I had never heard this with older phones, for example. And so I took a look at the iPhone SE. And so the iPhone SE is manufactured fairly similarly. And if I take the sheet of paper, yes, I can fit it in that little gap there. I looked at the same thing on the iPad Pro, which is a little bit newer, which has an aluminum frame. And so with the iPad Pro, I wanted to do the same thing, and you'll see it's actually holding the paper in the little gap there. And so, yes, you can see the same sort of tolerance differences on all of these phones. As I go to the iPhone 12 Pro, for example, if I bring it up close, there's going to be a little bit of a gap there. And then again, on the 12, we'll just take a look at that quickly. This has an aluminum frame, and you'll see the gap there. And then on the 12 mini, for example, you should see the same sort of gap. Now, when you're building millions upon millions of these phones, you need to build in tolerances, and Apple has built these tolerances in for a reason. There should be a tolerance between the outside glass and the metal edge. This is for a couple reasons. So one of them would be that materials change based on the temperature. So for example, when materials get colder, they tend to shrink and gaps can change. So when you have two dissimilar materials, two dissimilar metals next to each other, you need to account for the difference in temperature changing the overall size of the metal, whether that be stainless steel or aluminum, depending on which device we're talking about, whether it be the iPad Pro with aluminum, for example. Those material differences make a difference because you don't want it to get too small and then bind on the glass, causing the glass to be under tension and potentially crack. We've seen that in other devices with super tight tolerances, and they'll actually snap. You also have to account when you're manufacturing something for people sitting on the phone or maybe bending it when it's in a back pocket, for example. And so you want to make sure that you have enough room so that it's strong enough. You have to have enough room so when you drop it on maybe a floor, it doesn't bind up against the glass and crack the glass. There's a lot of reasons for making sure there's tolerances. And based on the tolerances that Apple sets, whether that be within microns or thousandths of an inch or however they're doing this, they need to make sure that they're within those tolerances. And these are checked by quality control before they're passed to the customer, for example. Now, the other thing is many people are saying, well, there's a gap there. Won't water get in? Because Apple has IP certified these for IP68 for about 6 meters for up to 30 minutes. And Apple's thought of that because if you take a look at this photo of a disassembled iPhone 12 Pro, for example, from iFixit, you'll see that there's a rubber or sort of adhesive gasket around the whole outside edge that helps seal it from water intrusion and also helps with structure and rigidity overall. So at this point, I think this isn't too much of an issue unless you could fit your thumbnail maybe in there where there's a huge gap between the glass and the frame itself. If you could put your thumbnail in there or something larger, of course, that could be a problem. But if you're seeing dust get in there, that's not that big of an issue, especially in the age where we're cleaning our phones more often, because dust will get into small areas that are difficult to remove. You could hit this with a little bit of air, compressed air, it would probably blow that right out, just like we get dust in the lightning port and in the speakers and microphone ports. So it's not really something I would be concerned about unless, like I said, there's a huge gap there. And I've even looked at older phones to take a look at that and see if we had that sort of issue on, say, an iPhone 11. So here's an iPhone 11. If we take a look at the outside gap, you're going to see it's going to have the similar tolerance. Now, when you have a phone sitting on top of that frame, it's going to be a little bit different. So I went along the outside edge on this one. Let's see if we can fit paper there as well. And on the outside edge of my iPhone 11, for example, you'll see that there's paper. I can fit a little paper in there. So there's going to be tolerance gaps that are 1/10 of a millimeter. That's pretty normal in my opinion. And like I said, I really would not worry about this. Now, if you have a tolerance that's much larger than that, where you could physically see into the side of it, I've seen some photos like that, then sure, bring it to Apple, have them take a look, and they'll let you know whether or not that's acceptable or not. But for the most part, when you're manufacturing two materials like this, butted up next to each other, it's difficult not only to manufacture on this scale to the level that Apple does with the quality they do, but it's also okay to have small changes between different phones because there's so many of them. We're talking about 100 million devices, and there's very few companies that can manufacture that many devices perfectly every single time. Now, like I said, tolerances are to be expected up to a certain point. You're going to see this on everything from vehicles to lenses for cameras themselves, but something that you use this often obviously is going to be more noticeable than not. If you have a screen protector in a case, you probably won't even notice it. So to me, this is not a big issue. I've looked at every edge of all of these phones, and I've not been able to find any issues where I think it's a big enough gap that I would be concerned about. Yes, there's a little bit of a gap down at the bottom, but again, there's material differences you have to account for, and again, manufacturing differences. There could be some suppliers that cut it just slightly differently with the glass as opposed to the frame. The aluminum I would expect to be a little bit different than, say, the stainless steel, for example. So you'll see there's a gap all the way around, and it's fine. And then I did take a look at, this is another iPhone 12 Pro, and again, this one has a screen protector on it, but if we look around the outside edge, yes, there's a little bit of a gap. Again, this is manufactured this way. No one is going to have no seam whatsoever in there. So I really wouldn't worry about it. I've had quite a few people concerned about it. But again, unless it's something where you can see into the phone, I wouldn't worry about it, or fit maybe your thumbnail between that gap. Then it's maybe a large enough gap. But again, keep in mind there's a gasket there with adhesive. So hopefully that eases you a little bit, helps you understand how things are built a little bit. And again, 1/10 of a millimeter is not something I'd be concerned about. Maybe if we had a gap a little bit bigger, like this, then I would be a little bit more concerned. But I think it was manufactured quite well, and I haven't seen too many issues on this. If your phone starts creaking or the screen starts popping up, well, then absolutely bring it into Apple, and usually they'll take care of it no problem, unless it was found to be dropped or fallen into water or something like that. Generally, they'll take care of it without a problem. I'd love to hear from you below whether or not you have any issues where you think it's too big of a problem, where you can actually see into the phone, not where you could fit a sheet of paper. And again, I wouldn't fit a sheet of paper in there. I wouldn't want to break any seals or anything like that. So just leave that alone, enjoy using your phone, and let me know your experience in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.